We are. We're waiting for one more. We're waiting for the chair.
Good morning and welcome. Today is Monday, July 27th, 2026, and we are here in the Commissioners' Conference Room for a work session regarding our housing action plans. I welcome you today. Today is, as I said, July 27th. I'm Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shai McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. Thank you for joining us today. At the conference table, I'm joined by Commissioner Kristen Stevens and Commissioner John Kafalis. Also at the table is our County Manager, Lorenda Volker, and we're joined by lots of staff who will be presenting on this housing action plan. So right now, I'm going to just turn this over to Aaliyah Rodriguez, who is our Housing Stability Manager. And never know if I have all the titles correct, but welcome, Aaliyah. I know we have a guest. I'll let you introduce our guest, and I see other staff in the corner over there. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. As stated, we're here to discuss priorities to establish our first Larimer County Housing Action Plan. I just wanted to do a brief overview before we get started. So as a reminder to you all and the public, in 2024, Senate Bill 24-174 was enacted. This was a new law that required all jurisdictions in Colorado to conduct housing needs assessments, and then following those housing needs assessments, they need to develop a housing action plan. So recognizing the bigger impact of collaborating with our largest municipalities, we partnered with the City of Fort Collins and the City of Loveland to complete a regional housing needs assessment, and this was completed by Root Policy in April of this year. So the next step is to develop our housing action plan, which housing action plan in the legislation, I just wanted to read what they define that as. So it's an advisory document that demonstrates the local government's commitment to address housing needs and guides that local government in developing policies, promoting regional coordination, and informing the public of their efforts to address those needs within their jurisdiction. So that's the plan that we're putting together. Also, before we dive into our discussion, I think it's important to ground our conversation in why. Why was this legislation passed? Why is it important for local governments to work on addressing housing needs? So a balanced housing stock that can accommodate a full life cycle community is central to that community thriving. A full life cycle community has accessible housing options for residents in every stage of their lives, from young adults moving out to families raising children to older adults needing more accessible options. So housing isn't just about the buildings that we live in, but it's the foundation of a thriving, connected community, and it's central to our physical health and our local economic growth. Our regional housing needs assessment revealed a severe mismatch between our region's supply and the local demand. The mismatch was driven by the past decade's worth of steep home prices and rent increases outpacing our local wage growth. The result of that mismatch was that over half of our local renters are cost burdened, which means they are paying more than 30% of their gross income on their housing costs. These affordability gaps are felt most in renters who are earning below 50% of our area median income, and also prospective homeowners who are earning below 120% of our area median income. Those are the families that are feeling this gap the most. To stabilize our market and accommodate growth, our region needs to produce new housing while also focusing on preserving the affordable housing stock that we have in our community. So those are kind of the key findings in our assessment. At the last section of our regional housing needs assessment, we were presented with key strategy recommendations for Larimer County. And so that's what we're going to focus in on today. And Root Policy will be sharing an overview of those strategies, which ones rose to the top, and what we should consider moving forward. So with that, I want to welcome and introduce Molly Fitzpatrick, Managing Director of Root Policy, who's going to lead our discussion today.
Great. Thanks, Aaliyah, and good morning, commissioners. Really appreciate the time, again, to really talk through this, and especially appreciate your willingness to engage with us before this meeting so that we can really come into this conversation kind of reflecting on some of the feedback that you've already provided. So really, really appreciate that. I know it's extra effort. I know you always have lots of prep. And so appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through that survey, think through a lot of these concepts, and help us have a sense of kind of where your priorities are even as we go into this conversation. And so as we move into this is just a quick overview of the Housing Action Plan, but Aaliyah's already given us a great overview of that. So we'll dive right in and really start with kind of the top line recommendations. So as you'll recall from our last conversation and even from the recommendations section of the Housing Needs Assessment, we came out of that regional assessment with 7 recommendations at kind of a high level that apply both to the county but also to your major cities as they're rolling into housing action planning as well. And so these are the 7 recommendations that came out of that process. As we work through our conversation today, I want to talk kind of about the high-level recommendations in general, what you said were your priorities within those recommendations. So we'll kind of show those. We'll talk through some of the feedback that you gave us at this level, and then we'll go recommendation by recommendation and talk through kind of what are the specific action items maybe that the county could take within each recommendation. And in this case, we'll do that not necessarily in the numerical order that these recommendations appear, but I want to talk through them in order of what you said your priorities were. So we'll talk through these high level, then we'll go in recommendation by recommendation. And obviously this is meant to be discussion. Make sure that we really fully understand some of the feedback that you've already provided through that survey, and that we have an opportunity for you all to discuss that, for us to make sure we understand it, so that coming out of this conversation, we really have what we need to draft a potential or draft the document that is the Housing Action Plan, and you'll have another chance to review that. That will also go out for public consumption as well. So that is where we are. So just as a quick reminder, I'll read through these briefly, then we'll talk through kind of what you've said your top priorities are within this. But broadly, the recommendations from that came out of the Housing Needs Assessment are to continue regional collaboration and public-private partnerships, consider funding source options that would go toward housing investments, allocate publicly owned land to affordable and mixed income development, preserve existing housing that's already serving low and moderate income households, implement land use and zoning modifications that help unlock supply in general and improve housing diversity, refine and expand development incentives for affordable housing, and assist and stabilize existing households through program support. So as we asked you all, what are your top priorities among those recommendations? And this shows you on those top priorities, the bar chart here is showing you those. The numbers there is just is sort of a score based on how each of you ordered them. So collectively, this is kind of what rose to the top. Top priorities collectively were regional collaboration, consider funding source options, preserve existing housing, and make sure that we're staying in compliance with Prop 123 that helps unlock those state funds. So those were the top priorities based on your feedback there. We also asked you some questions around, well, what does it look like to operationalize these? Making sure that we've got a plan and a timeline that's going to be reasonable. Regional collaboration continued to be part of how to operationalize that, relying and leveraging Prop 123, and then also doing all of that with an eye toward capacity. What is our staff capacity? What is our budget capacity? So that's kind of those blocks over there, just a little bit of a kind of pull out of what we heard from you in that open feedback around how to operationalize those. Also acknowledging some of the key partners and resources that you already have, your continuum of care, collaborating with municipalities, but looking toward, do we have a resource related to dedicated revenue? Came up as a comment as well, making sure we're relying on DOLA and Prop 123. And then some specific suggestions are also kind of in there. We don't necessarily have to go through all of those in particular. We are going to also talk through kind of what you said is working well, what was missing, and what you'd like to see from peer community. So we'll go into that next. But I'll pause here just to kind of open it up to make sure, do we feel like this is capturing kind of the order of priority that you'd like to see in terms of these high-level recommendations? And then we'll get into some of the details as we roll through. But top line, does this make sense? Any general comments?
Commissioner Stevens, I know I have some, I'm just waiting for my colleagues to see if they have comments first, because I do have a concern here. Thank you.
This actually does reflect my priorities, so really happy to see this. Obviously, we took the survey, and so, one of the questions that I have, and we can delve into it later if we want to, but as far as zoning modifications, I mean, beyond the mobile home park preservation districts, I'm not sure what that includes, because I know we've already done a lot of zoning. And so, and land use kind of, as we've been required to, and as we've actually really honestly, thanks to Aaliyah and our planning department, have really been ahead of the game compared to a lot of communities. So I don't know if there's stuff left to do, and I'm curious about that.
Great. I'll just respond briefly to that. I agree with you. I think you guys have already made a lot of the zoning modifications that we typically recommend in these types of studies. And so I think for you, when we talk about land use and zoning, it's less about additional changes, other than I do want to talk about the mobile home preservation option. It's less about kind of what additional changes do we need to make, and more about how do we make sure that we're kind of watching those to see if those changes are delivering what we want. So I think our recommendation as we get into the nitty gritty of land use and zoning is going to be less about make changes and more about watch and track what you've done, make sure it's delivering, and make sure that the community is aware of some of those changes, right? Are there ways to help kind of catalyze some of that new development or catalyze the use of some of those changes in a way that would be really productive? So.
Commissioner Kafalis, I see your hand is raised, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Molly.
Hi.
Thank you. I would agree that based on what I can remember when I completed the survey, it seems to reflect some of the priorities that I think we articulated. It would be nice, I don't know how easy it is to pull out the results. I'd like a copy of what I offered for the survey that remind me of, so that would be helpful. I'd like to suggest that. And I think what I understood from Molly, on the land use and zoning modifications, I agree that we've come a long way. I think it's like kind of what you said. It's about implementation. For example, one of the action items is regarding tiny homes and cottage clusters. I don't know what else we can do to actually see some of that happening. So maybe there's some thoughts on that, or maybe that's where our energy can be. And I presume too that you've checked with community development folks and planning folks to see if there are any other things we could do in the land use space. I know that they're working on the transfer of development rights, but that at this point might be limited based on some of the analyses that have been done. So I think overall this is great, and it seems like we've done a lot of good things. And I'm glad that the collaboration and the regionalism approach is still intact.
So I don't feel like this reflects all of my priorities, quite frankly. I still, of course, I believe in regional collaboration and partnerships, but I do feel like stabilization programs is important to move up a little bit. I'm not interested in land use and zoning modifications anymore. We've done a lot of those things, and I think we should wait to see our legislation. I think we've done a lot of work, and I think we should work on implementing those and working how those work together. And I think staff have especially community development, have put a lot of focus on this, and we have some other things like special events and things that have been, and data centers that really need to be taken a lot of staff time, and I think it's important. And the TDR program is wrapping up, and there were some recommendations from there that maybe it wasn't going to be as effective as we hoped because of costs. And so I just think that we've been kind of ahead of the game, and maybe, we should allow staff to it's going to be a big thing with the data center. So I just feel like that has to be maybe a little bit of understanding staff capacity there. And I do think that stabilization programs, keeping people housed, is really important. I think it's a return on of cost avoidance. Once people are unhoused or experiencing that, it costs a lot. And I think, Aaliyah, you said $1,500 saved almost 10 times as much as $1,500 to keep someone from being evicted, kind of gave us almost 10 times that, in return and trying to get them rehoused. So I think that's important. I guess preserve existing housing. I have some concerns about the effectiveness of the Larimer Housing Improvement Program. I just like to understand how that money is being used and where it's going and how effective it is. And I'm not really interested in incentives right now. I think there's been a build, and I don't see a targeted approach. I don't see getting to the housing that I think we're needing for our first responders, teachers, nurses, essential people. I just see just more market rate or apartments sitting empty, and so I kind of feeling it just. I'm wondering how. I would be curious if incentivizing these things are having the returns that we think. I still wonder if people are still turning these into long-term rentals for the long term with deed restrictions, or whether this is, kind of a lot of ways that we can't keep up with short-term rentals being hidden and done and things like that. I also, the eviction prevention, I'm glad to see that there. I still think that's a good return. And, my first year in office from my district, I pushed and we got now State Senator Kathy Kipp to do, because it wasn't legal in Colorado to have tiny homes. And I had found that out when I asked about putting that in the land use code. So I worked with her on trying to get that through, and it was I will never say it's just a simple language change in a bill again, because it was more than a simple language change. There are more tiny homes. I'm just not sure they're done in following the current implementation and land use codes. I think there's a lot more that are being done not following the code, and now have come almost kind of a code compliance thing, because I'm not sure they're safely built or put in the right place with access to sewer or wastewater and the right proper things. So I would say maybe looking how we can help those that maybe are out there get into compliance. And then the cottage clusters, I just, I keep hoping it's there, and maybe eventually the right person with the right piece of land with the right mindset or wants to do that kind of thing. I don't know if we really, I'm glad it's there, and I think it's a good option, but I think the tiny homes, I see them starting to pop up and stuck in places that maybe aren't safe or within code compliance. So I think that might be something to try to help folks get into compliance or find better places, because I think they're being added to other properties in the back. I see it every time up in my district in the hills and in the canyons, and so I worry about the safety of it, and I want to make sure that we're making sure those are being safe, especially with water and wastewater connections. So, I would kind of say, yes, I believe that regional collaboration and partnerships is the only way to do this, so that would be definitely still my top, but I wouldn't, I guess I say the rest. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, just really quick. This is all the commissioners together. So, I mean, I will say, while Commissioner, respectfully to the chair, that this is how the priorities came out as we did our survey.
Yeah.
So there may be some differences amongst us, of what should be, but, that's what popped up as the top priority. So I still support, what's listed here.
I believe you had asked us the question, did we see our top priorities there, and did we have some feedback? So that's what I did. Thank
Yep.
you.
No,
Commissioner
perfect,
Kafalis.
Yes, and regarding the stabilization programs, I think that played out. I mean, it's identified eviction prevention, we all agree is really important up front. And the fact that it's above 4, to me, means that it's a higher priority. So that I think though anything above 4 definitely merits more attention and implementation. And yeah, anything we can do to keep folks in their homes is a good idea.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I think that came out as well in our feedback on, we said, just in general, what do you feel like is working well? What's missing? What do you want to see and hear from other communities? And certainly eviction prevention. So that is one of those stabilization programs, is at the top of the list in terms of what you all said. We feel like this is working. So that's great. Preservation, helping people age in place, partnerships and regional approaches. All of that was kind of bundled in the what's working well feedback. In terms of needing more attention or things that might be missing that we didn't quite get all the way where you wanted it to be in terms of the initial recommendations, what we heard from you was making sure we're taking a look at what can we do for our mobile home park residents or manufactured housing community residents, making sure we are looking at options for that middle income housing group, including some of those first responder groups. And those kind of second, third bullet there in the middle are a little bit tied together. So in that middle income housing, are we looking for ways to help build wealth? And that typically, historically in our country has meant home ownership. And so what are we doing to make sure there's access for that? And to Aaliyah's point earlier, the group that we heard from in the needs assessment that's feeling that the most are those folks below 120% AMI. So making sure we're gonna kind of keep an eye toward those as we work through some of the specific recommendations going forward. And then peer ideas to consider. A couple of specific things that popped up were, dedicated funding. We'll talk about that. Looking at other state policy examples, including hero housing, mixed use developments. So how can we make sure we're kind of building these whole communities, not just housing itself, but also the community that has the other amenities. And so we'll keep an eye toward those things as we are working through. And kind of with that, I'd love to jump into each specific recommendation and really talk about what does this look like for Larimer County. So again, as I mentioned, I'm taking these out of order in terms of the numerical order. We're going to go kind of in order of what we saw in that priority. That way we make sure we're talking about the most important things to you all first. I know that sometimes these meetings get tight on the back end, so we want to make sure we're hitting the big stuff first. The first one is regional collaboration. So I think as we look at this, some specific ideas were, including thinking about ways to collaborate with Weld County. Larimer County and its municipalities seem to collaborate really well. Weld County kind of does its own thing. That's okay. It's hard institutionally to collaborate across counties, but looking for ways to do that even among service providers as well. So this is not just a recommendation for the county, but also to service providers and municipalities to say, hey, are we making sure we're reaching across that county line? Continued implementation of the regional homelessness strategy, continue to cultivate public-private partnerships, identify potential collaborations to achieve Prop 123 goals. So we're seeing that more and more throughout the entire state of counties and municipalities really saying, okay, you've built this much in your jurisdiction. Can we borrow some of those credits? Looking for ways to do that as well. And then this last bullet, I think, is what we heard as kind of the most direct, action item that would really be led by the county. And so curious your thoughts on county role here. Based on our initial feedback, we are assuming that kind of this last bullet is kind of the primary county role. And that would be to take the lead on convening, data sharing, and resource alignment. So this suggestions for what that could include would be developing a data dashboard, which actually the county's already done as part of the HNA, collaborating on Prop 123, so continuing to lead those conversations, and continuing to lead on outreach and education, potentially through the Housing Summit in particular. So really curious, I think specifically on this one, just feedback from you all on, does that seem like the right role for the county in terms of convening, data sharing, resource alignment? Or are there different places you think the county should be leading on this regional effort?
Commissioner Cafalas, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. Just a suggestion and a question on this one. Regarding the first bullet point, collaboration with Weld County, one opportunity there would be to, through the Economic and Workforce Development, we actually work with them very well in that, and there's obviously an organic nexus between workforce development, economic development, and the cost of housing. So I would offer that as an opportunity to maybe talk with our folks there to see perhaps how housing can be more in the conversations when we talk about workforce development. And I believe it is, but maybe it needs to be elevated. And then my question on the final, and I think overall this is, I think, where we need to be going, the data sharing and resource alignment. My question there is, I know we got a $50,000 grant, incentive grant or something like that, for a deed restriction data dashboard. What is a deed restriction data dashboard?
Good question. Thank you, Commissioner. So this is referring to our data dashboard that we already have, that we created based off of our regional housing needs assessment that's on our website, that breaks it down by community. You can see all the housing needs across Larimer County. The $50,000 grant that we received from DOLA was incentive funds for us meeting our fast track requirement early. And we were able to use those $50,000 for something to further our affordable housing goals. And so what we proposed to DOLA was the creation of a deed restriction database, and they have approved that project and have funded it. Right now, we're in the contracting phases of it, so we haven't kicked it off just yet. But what we'll be able to do is create an inventory of all of our current deed restricted units across Larimer, so not just in the unincorporated areas, but within our municipalities as well. And through that, we'll be able to track the deed restrictions to see when they expire so that we can create a preservation strategy as a region and be able to prepare for when those deed restrictions are expiring to see if there is a nonprofit or other community partners that would be able to purchase that and continue that affordability moving forward.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, all of this. And I feel like with the last data point or the last bullet point, that Aaliyah and her team are already doing a lot of this work. So I'm hoping that the bandwidth is still there to kind of continue that, because I do believe, I might not have ranked regional collaboration top, but I think it was in my top 3 for sure. And the more I think about it, the more I am excited about doing this work together with others, because I think that, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with, join with others kind of thing. And I think that that's how I feel about this work, is that, doing it in conjunction with one another is just really going to have better outcomes. So the collaborating on Prop 123, and I'm still curious about the HUD consortium. Like, I know that that's something that's maybe a little further down the line, but I do think that maybe an opportunity to also collaborate and then potentially get in some additional funds. But yeah, I definitely like this approach. There's so many people doing this work too. I think the convening is really important to see. In the past couple months, I've had meetings with Habitat and meetings with, people from the NOCO Foundation, and everybody's got their little piece, right? And so kind of seeing how we're all working towards this goal. And that's why I like the collaboration on Prop 123. I think having some smart measurable goals in the action plan is really important, and Prop 123 sort of provides some framework around that. And if we do that work together, I think we'll go farther and we'll all be able to achieve our goals. So thank you.
And I do think the regional collaboration is tied to some of the funding source conversation. So it's a good segue if we want to jump into funding source, which is next to talk about the home. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Still, as chair, I'd like to have a chance to make
Oh,
my
yeah.
2 cents. Sorry, but that's one thing about being chair. Sometimes people forget you get to speak too and have your input. So I still think this was one of my top ones. I'm not sure what that looks like, collaboration with Weld County. I'm not sure where that looks like. I'm not sure I want to be over in Weld County helping projects over there. If it's closer to us, I'm not sure. So I guess I would wonder what that looks like. But I do think the current and continuum of care work is important, and I think that's part of that. But I would really want to understand what that collaboration looks like and what they're bringing also to the table and what that means for us. I would have lots of questions about that going forward. And then I still cultivating public-private partnerships. I'm not sure what that looks like, because that says to me us bringing money to fill in gaps, and we don't have money to fill in gaps right now. So I'm curious what that looks like, and is that things that we would incentivize? I'm not sure, because I still would, it would matter on what type of housing, targeted, strategic, not just building more market rate. I don't think that's helping our situation right now. And so I'm really skeptical about that, quite frankly, from what I've seen and experienced over the last few years around Larimer County. So I have a lot of skepticism about that. I'd have to ask questions and ask, is that really achieving what we need to see built in Larimer County in the right places at the right time? So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Sure,
I see you'd like to answer that, Leah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly about the public-private partnerships. Typically, when we use that phrase at the county level, we're talking about investing our private activity bonds and encouraging those public-private partnerships, which is something we already do. So we're not talking about pulling resources from other places. And those private activity bond allocations have to be used for affordable housing development. So.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can be more clear when we explain that then, because right now the public thinks we're partnering with developers to, help their projects. And I think if we're more clear on what that is, because right now how I read that and what that says and how it's been, in the survey, I don't know if that really talks about that. I appreciate you clarifying that, but I also like to see how we can I would like to see more middle income and look at some for our working families who are trying to just afford their first home. So that's something that I still like to see more focus on. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that feedback.
Thank
We
you.
can definitely clarify. Thanks, Leah. Jumping to, so that's super helpful. Thanks, everybody. It sounds like we're all kind of on the right path, at least on regional collaboration. Jumping to the second priority was funding source for housing. So we had kind of 4 action items under this recommendation. One is to study potential local funding tools to make sure to then determine what's appropriate, what's politically viable. So this is really kind of an education information component of this phase to really understand what are our options and do any of those make sense for us. The second is to explore a lodging tax specifically. I know you all have had that conversation before to some extent, so really continue to explore that in a little bit more depth. Third is to explore the potential benefits of HUD entitlement grants through a home consortium. Obviously, that's come up as well. You all are aware of that as a kind of ongoing conversation. That does relate very directly to regional collaboration because it's not something that the county can do all by itself. It's really about, do we want to be a consortium, and that's going to be dependent to some extent on Fort Collins as well. And then to continue to monitor funding gaps in housing service provision, to evaluate those financial needs. That really is part of just having regular conversations with your nonprofits, your service providers, understanding where the biggest needs are, and keeping an eye toward that, as federal funds are a little bit all over the place right now. And so just understanding kind of making sure we're kind of having fiscal responsibility and understanding what's coming in, what's changing. So in the survey and as part of our conversation, some of the things that we ask are, which of these do you feel like is immediate, short-term priority, long-term? And then another question was specifically related to ARPA era programs. So ARPA was a massive injection in terms of funding for a lot of communities. Housing programs were part of some of that funding. And so one of the questions we said, okay, what are you nervous about that was funded potentially with ARPA initially that you want to make sure we're looking at? Eviction prevention is what popped up on that. So making sure that we are evaluating, do we have the funds to continue that eviction prevention that you've been doing? And then on timing, this bar chart, the short term, this again aggregates all of your responses on these specific options, and which of those do you feel like is is short-term, long-term, or I'm not really sure where I want this to go. And so in terms of kind of the most short-term votes were on study potential local funding tools. So evaluating what your options are. Explore lodging tax also had pretty good short-term votes, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so obviously those can be in process, but seem like things that we should make sure that we're including. Again, we're not including this in a way that obligates you to implement that necessarily. This is really an exploratory phase of this to understand what would that look like, what could that look like, what tools do we want to make sure that we're considering. And then explore home consortium, short and long term, and then monitoring gaps in funding source, more emphasis there on long term. So really looking at the long view of what do we have funds for, where are our needs, and making sure that. So with this one, I really just want to make sure that as we think about those priorities in terms of short term and long term, kind of where we're placing these in that kind of time-bound structure of SMART goals. Does this feel about right? Do we have any major concerns with expressing, some short-term goals should be really to look at those tools, including lodging tax, and then continue to explore home consortium, and then long-term really focus on making sure we understand those funding gaps.
Commissioner Stevens, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I probably put everything in the short term, so I may have swayed these just because I realize that some kind of dedicated funding source is really important. In the work that I do in Middle Income Housing Authority Board and some of the other work that I've done, it's a really tough environment to build anything right now because of interest rates and uncertainty around the economy. And so, to have something that fills in those gaps. And when Commissioner Shattuck McNally, I absolutely agree that middle income housing is also really important. And it's even harder to get off the ground than low income housing in some cases because there's not as many grant opportunities or bonding opportunities as there are with lower income housing. And so, and I'm really glad that the Community Foundation I think that's a gap that they saw around home ownership, and I think that they're wanting to address that as well. But I do feel like there's a real need for funding just to help a project get off the ground, honestly, or to fill in that gap funding. And over half of our residents are cost burdened. I mean that speaks to a real need and crisis in our community. And so I think exploring funding seems to be, to me, feels really immediate. And I get that we can't do everything in the short term, but certainly the more we can do in the short term to help the situation, the better.
Commissioner Kafalis, do you have comments you'd like to make? So I certainly I was a lot of the unsure of the long term because I feel like we have lots of competing priorities right now. We have implementation from HR1. I still like to see how we can partner with those folks who are focusing on middle income housing. I understand the challenges that are there, but I do think there's opportunities. And also I just, I think there is a lot to consider with this. And so I know we're talking about housing today, but I also want to, bring my reality right now is thinking about the competing needs between HR1 and SNAP benefits and wildfire mitigation and all these other things that we have, roads, things. This all has to be considered. So the short term, it makes me a little uncomfortable because I think we have a lot of things to discuss with how we look at this as a whole holistic picture of all the competing priorities that we need. So I want to just kind of make that comment. So thanks.
Great. Great. Thanks for that feedback. I think we can totally understand, I think, the need for balancing priorities and acknowledging that. And so looking toward, I think we can kind of move these forward in the exploration phase in a way that doesn't necessarily kind of force that decision too early, hopefully. So we'll try to balance that as we look at that. So the next two topics we're going to talk about, preservation and then stabilization, and that'll cover kind of our biggest priorities. And then to the extent we have time, we'll come back. We can kind of do a quick overview on land use zoning, dedicated land and incentives. Those are kind of the bottom three priorities, I think, across the board. So I want to make sure we have time to talk about preservation, and then we'll go to stabilization next. So in the preservation strategy, we're recommending maintain a database of income restricted housing properties. We've already talked about that briefly with the grant from DOLA, gives that kind of some kind of momentum already. Partnering with local nonprofits who could be able to acquire that existing income restricted priorities or income restricted properties to continue those. Contingent on resources, dedicate funds to support acquisition and rehab. So those first three are pretty tied together to some extent. Those are kind of building on one another. One is to know, what do we have that's income restricted? And if that's going to expire, do we have those local nonprofits that can make sure we're renewing that? And to the extent that they need it, can the county help support financially that process? It's typically similar. It can be done with private activity bonds. So a lot of times those will be 4% LIHTC deals with a PAB, and then that will allow that to renew. So it could be dedicating those private activity bonds to that. It could be gap financing. That's typically what that looks like in that context. So having that in as an option doesn't obligate those resources up front, and that's a very kind of reactive situation in which, if a nonprofit said, hey, we want to do this, can you help contribute? Then it becomes a decision as we think about that. So the first three are kind of tied together in terms of preserving your existing dedicated affordable housing stock. And then the next one is really looking at, well, we have naturally occurring affordable housing. That's what NOAA stands for. And so what are our options to try and preserve that? So there's a handful of things that the different communities have looked at or are doing. So really just kind of continuing to evaluate what programs are out there that are doing that and seeing if there are ways that the county can engage in some of those efforts. And then finally, and I know this has been as a priority for some of you, really looking at how can we support residents of mobile home communities or manufactured housing communities to make sure that that affordable option continues to exist for people and it exists in a way that is safe, is habitable, all of those sorts of things as well. So those were kind of the key preservation action items. And so when we asked for feedback on terms of what's your top priority among those, what rose to the top collectively for you all was looking at policy and program options for mobile home parks, making sure that acquisition and rehab is an option, and developing that preservation database as well. So those are the three that kind of rose to the top. We also asked you a really specific question about private activity bonds and whether you wanted to emphasize prioritization of those on preservation. There was not consensus around doing that. That doesn't mean you can't use your private activity bonds in that way, but there was not consensus to say we want to always use our private activity bonds in that way, right? So we heard that feedback, I think, loud and clear. Probably don't need necessarily discussion on that, but do want to just kind of open conversation as well in terms of if there's specific things, especially around the mobile home park or manufactured housing community options. I think to the chair, this is one place where we could also look at when we're talking about interventions for mobile home owners and mobile home residents. A lot of times what we do talk about is code compliance. Do we have grants where they can make upgrades and that sort of thing? And I think we could look at ways to extend that to tiny homes as well, acknowledging that that was one of your concerns, to make sure are we doing those in a safe way. And so looking at ways where programs could be available to tiny home residents as well as manufactured and mobile home residents as well might be a place to integrate that. But any other specific comments? I mean, we've talked, I think, before about how Fort Collins has done a great job, and so looking for ways to extend some similar programs in the county. But anything specific you want to make sure that we hear or include around mobile and manufactured homes?
And I just want to, staff in our community development program did partner with Fort Collins and did some work. And so I just want to make sure that I think they did a fantastic job as well, especially in New Vida, and I'm getting updated. So I want to just, Fort Collins did a good job, but I think our staff, especially in code compliance and community development, did some programs. I think it was last year. I'm not sure about this year, but I think they did an outstanding job there. So I just wanted to say that. So Commissioner Stevens, do you have anything you want to say here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing is, sort of in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about water quality and some of these quality of life issues that come up in mobile home parks. And I don't know, kind of really where that ranks for me, but it is something that I have concerns about. And I know, with some of the ARPA dollars, we were able to do backflow prevention, in some parks, which is honestly a fairly basic way to ensure water quality, and yet, there's so many parks that don't even have that basic, let alone sort of some of the situations with pipes. And I know there's state regulations around some of that, but, are there places where the situation is bad enough that we want to get involved, I guess? And there again, I mean, like, I'm already like, oh my gosh, how much did we put on Aaliyah and your team already? At the same time, like, I do think that we just need to, kind of have somewhat of a eye on that. And, it's not necessarily even our role to do it, but do the utilities need to play a role in that? Do we need to help at least get resources to people when they have concerns and stuff like that? And then, are there situations that are more emergent than others? Just feeling like, after what happened in Flint, Michigan, a lot of sensitivity around, everybody dropped, it was nobody's responsibility. And I don't feel like that. I feel like it is our responsibility to make sure that we're watching for really health issues in our community. And so how does the health department get involved? Others, I mean, it's just something that's always sitting at the back of my mind every time there's a water shutdown or a water or a do not, or a boil order, that why isn't, despite the state laws, despite the health department, despite some of the work we've done, we still see these things pop up. And so, I don't, there again, know exactly what that looks like. Just know that it's important for us to be aware of some of these quality of life issues. So thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would add to Commissioner Stevens' comments. The water quality, of course, is important in the manufactured housing communities. I think other types of infrastructure are also important. For example, Nueva Vida was able to get state dollars to improve their roadway and drainage. So I think other types of infrastructure we should also be keeping in mind. And finally, that relates to a recent issue that's come up with MIVOS and others around emergency preparedness. And I know it's not your job to do that, but it's just to make sure that we're communicating and working together with Office of Emergency Management. They indicated that they're starting to maybe reach out to the parks to look at conducting training sessions or workshops, and you probably know a bunch about that, especially and bringing it back to infrastructure when evacuation routes is only one way in and one way out. So I think that's another important piece of this infrastructure thing.
Great. Thanks for those additions.
I'll go back to, these are all important things, but I'm wondering who and where we pay for all this, and especially when some of the mobile home parks, I mean, the water quality of life issues, it bothers and troubles us all. But also I wonder how we encourage our municipality partners to step up and when they're in their municipality areas, and especially if the in and out ways is, on it's our municipalities. Those are lots of things to consider, and I'm sure the fire departments also would be important partners to talk about ingress, egress, and maybe be the better partner to take the lead on that. So I just think that's important because I think they might have more pull than to kind of do it a life safety issue. So I think that's, with limited, all these things, Aaliyah, unless we're going to clone you 5 times, I'm wondering how we get all this done. So I just want to just think, I'm also thinking short-term versus long-term versus unsure, because, there's a lot ahead of us, and I'm just not sure what this plan would look like, and what are the, I'm unclear on what, you talk about the recommendations and a plan we have to have, but does that mean that we have to exactly follow it? Is there a timeline and what is expected, and when do we have to have this finished? I don't know what it's all the requirements for that. I'm unclear about that, so.
Yep. And I can at least respond in terms of the state kind of requirements around housing action plans. They last for a period of 6 years. So the things that we're talking about are kind of on the list for 6 years. There's no, statutory obligation that you have to achieve everything in your plan. You do have to demonstrate to DOLA, look, here's how we made progress, or explain why we didn't make progress on on those in order to stay kind of in good standing there. But again, there's no like numerical obligation of, oh, you're out because you didn't achieve these necessarily. But that's all great feedback.
So I'm just unclear. So if we put this in the action plan, what are we held accountable for? Are we to finish all of these things or do all these things? That's what I'm worried. That's what I'm concerned about. What is expected? Is it just a list of recommendations that we strive for? Because if there's a little bit more of accountability measure, I'm curious about what that means in the long term, because conditions might change or worsen with budget cuts and all these other things. And I'm wondering, if this is a mandate, another unfunded mandate, and then do we have, things that we need to follow through with, that we have to cut services in other areas to do this? I'm just curious about that.
Right. So as it stands right now, our understanding from DOLA is that no, there is not going to be a sort of, punitive response if you don't achieve those. There are reporting requirements. So in 3 years, you go back to DOLA and say, hey, here's what progress we've made. Here's what progress we haven't made. And then in 6 years, it's kind of a full renewal of what is your new housing action plan. As part of those, the kind of second housing action plan that you would do, DOLA does ask you to reflect back on your previous housing action plan and say, did you make progress on these and why or why not? But you can say, why not? No, we didn't make progress on this because we had to prioritize other funding priorities, or we had to do something different with these funds, or our strategy was to explore this and we explored it and decided it wasn't the right approach at that time based on our current needs and demands and that sort of thing. So as it stands right now, unless the law changes, unless DOLA adds a whole bunch of other layers, this really is about what are we striving for? And the accountability is in reflecting on why or why not, in terms of whether those were met or not. And so there's not a specific requirement that says you have to achieve these things in a specific way. The only thing that is really specific and measurable in terms of DOLA is that Prop 123 requirement. And again, if you don't hit your Prop 123 requirement, all that means is you lose funding opportunity for one of the years. So you're 1 year out. So I would say the punitive options on this are very, very low.
Okay, and I knew that was 1 year, but so is this a part of the 123? If we don't meet the goal, then we miss a year? This is
separate from that.
Okay, just
yeah.
want to make
Sorry,
sure.
I was just kind of lumping those as like, here are the things that DOLA has kind of put forth in the last
because I was like, wait a minute.
years. No, that's separate.
I didn't know
Yep.
that was, I was like, wait a minute, is that not separate? And
Right.
that's part of that? Because then I would have really big concerns about that, because that's asking a lot to, especially for
Right.
counties, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. So thanks for clarifying that.
Sure. So I do want to jump to stabilization. This is kind of the other one that is a high priority for you all. So I want to make sure we get some feedback on this one. So in terms of stabilization programs, the specific actions that we have framed out, at least in draft form, are to continue to make strategic investments in programs that are stabilizing households, continue your existing successful programs, expand those as possible. We understand there's capacity constraints, both on the service providers side, but also on the funding side. So continuing those successful programs, expand those if you can. Support accessibility programs and other services that create opportunities for seniors to age in place. Continue to implement the regional homelessness strategy, continue to promote education and awareness. So a lot of this is a lot of stuff you're already doing, and we're saying you're doing a great job at a lot of these. Continue what's working, monitor where there might be continued gaps, and make sure that this is just continuing forward. So as part of that, we did ask kind of what are your priorities within these stabilization programs? That's this bar chart on the bottom. We also asked about, kind of regional role on homeless prevention and implementation. The biggest concern in terms of that is really about capacity and funding, right? So that is something I think we all are aware of, and we want to make sure that we're acknowledging, yes, that's an important thing. Again, challenging with capacity and funding, but keeping an eye toward that. In terms of the specific program priorities, collectively, what rose to the top for y'all was that continue your successful programs, expand those as possible. Rental assistance, eviction program, protection, your landlord incentive program. Next priority would be support accessibility and senior aging in place programs. Following that, there's a little bit of a drop off, and then these bottom three are kind of all pretty close. That's in strategic investments and stabilization, regional homelessness strategy, and education and awareness. So kind of top two as we think about capacity constraints would be continue what's working, and then to extent possible, look for accessibility and senior aging in place options. So any questions, comments on that? I just want to acknowledge we have about, from my clock, we have 7 minutes left. This is the last major topic. So the other three, I'll just blast through really quickly after we wrap this. We just need a couple minutes on those.
I don't see any hands. I would just like to make one quick comment on the aging in place for older adults. I do think that that is certainly a priority, knowing that our population is, of that percentage, our population will be growing as a greater percentage. I do hope that we'll look to partner with the Office on Aging and certain federal and state programs. I think there's some partnerships there, and so I just wanted to make that comment. Commissioner Kafals, your hand is raised.
Thank you. Very quickly, I agree. I'm glad that that particular bullet point is in there, helping older adults age in place, especially as you have learned visiting some of the mountain rural areas like Red Feather Lake. So thank you for that very much. Where it says tax relief or, property taxes going up, that's really hard on a lot of folks on fixed income. And it talks about education awareness. Totally agree. To inform people to make sure that they know what's out there, whether you're 100% disabled veteran, et cetera. But also maybe part of that, and it's probably implicit that, other things that may not be directly property tax relief, but they offset costs elsewhere, like electric bills, so that they have more money to perhaps pay the property taxes. Mm-hmm. Thank you, that's all.
Yep, great point.
Okay, let's blast through the rest since we're out of time.
Great, perfect. So land use and zoning, and incentives, those are kind of lumped in on this one. As we talked about, this is not the highest priority. And really, as we think about this, looking to increase awareness of those zoning changes and support implementation and uptake. That really is, I think, the kind of crux of what we're recommending here, and looking at ways to do that. That includes development of those alternative type toolkits, which we're already working on. In terms of, so I can kind of move through that one. That's really where I think there's consensus that should be the approach on these. I think this just kind of recaps your feedback on this. So acknowledging, we heard that as, but again, staff capacity and making sure planning capacity is focusing on the things it needs to, as is housing staff as well. Publicly owned land, that was also one that was not a top priority, but looking at an inventory of existing publicly available land, maintaining partnerships for mission-driven or community-oriented landowners, consider conducting site-specific analyses, and watch for property that could be acquired or redeveloped. And kind of jumping to what you all would provide or prioritize as part of that, what we heard from you was just make sure that you're actively maintaining those partnerships with mission-driven, community-oriented landowners. I think there will potentially continue to be state legislation around this issue. And so I think, we've seen several attempts in the last couple of years of like, hey, can we make it easier to build affordable housing on church-owned land or on educational, institutional-owned land? And so continuing to monitor that and make sure you've got partners in the community that might take advantage of those state programs as they arise. And then second is develop an inventory of publicly available land. So those two are relatively, I would say, low cost in terms of just maintaining partnerships. Your staff obviously already has great partnerships with those entities and that as well, but just being kind of aware of those and keeping an eye out for those opportunities. So, and that is it in terms of the actual action items. I just put the kind of recommendations back up here again at a high level, and would just ask if there's any other feedback that you want to make sure we include. Welcome that in the last couple minutes, or continue to welcome your direct feedback as well, either by emailing Aaliyah or reaching out to us directly as we continue to frame this up. Our next steps are to draft the actual housing action plan based on this feedback. That will go out to public comment, come back to you all for approval as well.
Commissioner Kafals, your hand is raised.
Yes, just to say thank you. Well done. I think you've done a great job of incorporating a lot of the feedback, so I think that's wonderful. I did want to do a quick shout out for the new, which I was surprised to see on the table and in my desk. So it was a pleasant surprise. But this is the new Larimer County Office of Housing Stability 2026 Housing Resource Guide. I looked through it. It looks great. And I'm hoping we can get the word out. I'm sure you'll do your best to make sure that folks know this resource is available. I think that's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just thank you, great work. Really great to sort of see it all laid out. And I do like the idea, and I've mentioned this before, of those Prop 123 goals being part of the housing action plan, just because I feel like there should be some measurable goals. I think also we very much have the ability to hit those goals, and so having something that is measurable that we can point to, especially after a DOLA report, but I think for the community as well to kind of see, kind of what, that we have, because there are a lot of great goals here, but not a lot of them are necessarily as measurable, and so that kind of holds us to like at least one measurable goal that we, I feel like is achievable and also, is something we can report on. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we all got the Housing Stability Guide a few weeks ago, so thank you, Leah, for making sure we all had a copy. I just want to thank you for the conversation today, and certainly I still have concerns about the publicly owned land. I think those other ones are way more priorities, and I'm not sure I'm interested in any of our public, owned lands that are conservation easements or any of those things. I know other communities and counties are looking at that. I think those taxpayer monies was used to conserve and have conservation needs to conserve our open spaces. And so I just want to be really careful of that. I am not interested in anything like that. And then I think for me, I just wanted to highlight that I still think it would be nice to have a process or develop a first right refusal protocol. I still don't know, especially when it comes to mobile home parks, just so that we have kind of, when we hear from those mobile home residents who learn their parks being sold, it's always, I had to go back and look for, what do we say and how do we help them? Who do we send them to? And I think that might be nice to have just a process just to help us, to help put them in the right, engage with the right people at the right time. But I appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion, and certainly I appreciate the clarification on what this means and what this is. I'm also saying that for the public too, so they understand this does not mean this is, carved into granite, and I think conditions might be changing. And I'll just want to thank you all for your work. Thank you all staff for being here today. Lorena, did you want to, with the last minute, you want to say anything?
I guess what I would ask Elias, what's the next step? So now you've got some additional feedback today. What comes next, and what's that timeline look like?
Molly, feel free to jump in on timeline, but the next steps is taking this feedback and then actually drafting the housing action plan based on DOLA's requirements and recommendations. Once we have that drafted plan, then it'll be shared with the public for public comment for 30 days, and then it'll be brought back to the board for approval, and then we will be finished. Mm-hmm.
Great question. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that very much. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is, again, a very important discussion, and I look forward to seeing kind of that draft final plan. And thank you, Molly, so much for being here today. It's always great to have your expertise in the room. I appreciate your passion for this. It's really very much valued. So thank you for being here. We appreciate the partnership.
Thank you all so much.
So at 11:01, we are adjourned. I hope you have a great day. Have a great week.